you know what? What I might do is start at the front of the camera and work my way to the back. So we'll start with the very front, which actually has, there's a built-in lens cap, and there's a switch right behind here. It's just a little toggle. Basically, I lift it up, and that will open up the lens. So you see it snaps, and it's just a big, it's a dust cover essentially to protect the lens. So then, and the lens is actually this whole part of the camera, like from here back to here. The camera is actually this bit right here, because the battery is this. Let's take a look at the lens first. So there's two things basically on the lens. There's a focus ring, which you can turn, and you can't really see what happens. If I turn this one, I'm on autofocus. And I'll go over how to switch all this stuff back and forth. If I rotate this one, you know, it goes in and out of focus. That makes sense. It's going, so my focus is actually going this direction and then maybe that direction. So it's rotating to and or past. I'm going to switch it back to auto. So the autofocus is useful for when your subject is moving. And there it goes. Hey. There, see? So then the next ring is actually a zoom ring. And this thing is actually toggled. So there are two options for zooming on this camera. One, you'll see right here there's a toggle. That's our forward and backward zoom. Can you see that? There's actually one right up here too. There's a toggle there. But it's a little bit, so you can see while I'm zooming this camera in and out, it's a little bit kind of jerky. Unless I hold really still, I can't go really slow. It's kind of controllable, but I don't really know where the end is, so if I hit the end, it just stops. So I like to use the manual control, which is this one. On the bottom underneath, there's actually a zoom. Are you trying to be in the shot? Very nice. There's a zoom servo manual switch. That essentially switches, and I don't know what this is set to. It's set to servo right now. So servo means it's on the toggle. So you can use the toggles to zoom in and out. Manual means it's on this focus ring, or the zoom ring. So if I switch this one to manual, and it pops out to where the ring is set, I can use that ring to actually zoom in. It takes a little practice and to get really good with it, but you have a little bit more control. So there's the switch right there. Oh, and there's a record button right beside it too, in case you forget where to hit record. There's like 3, 4 record buttons on these cameras. So I can control that a little more with our lens ring here. Okay, so that's the two pieces that are actually on the lens. Then we get to this ND filter. ND filter, ND stands for neutral density. I like night day filter because then it kind of reminds you of what it's useful for. So the ND filter is for when you're shooting in really bright light. This is not really bright light, but you can kind of see what it does when I switch it from off to a quarter. It darkens up the footage. If I switch to 16th and 1/64th, so it compensates for over bright footage. So you're shooting outdoors, it's really bright, and it's a lot of like white concrete and that kind of stuff. Your whites will blow out. Typically your white will get too bright and it'll just overexpose. So the ND filter helps combat that. If you're shooting indoors, and every time I switch it, it kind of blows a little bit because the sensor is adjusting to the filter. It's basically kind of like adding a darkening filter to it. I don't recommend using it unless you're shooting outdoors in really bright sunlight. That's usually when it's effective. So I can come in here, I can turn on display, and now you can see on this screen I've got a bunch of all the same information that's displayed up there. All right, then we'll come back to audio actually in a bit. Then I've got focus, which is basically auto and manual. I can switch autofocus Right now it's on auto. If I switch it to manual, then I can take this focus ring and manually, go way off. Switch it back to auto and it will come back in on its own. Focus, and then there's this little temporary push auto. So if I have it on manual, it's out of focus. I don't know which direction I need to go to get it in focus, so I can just hold that. It will focus itself, and then I can let it go, and it's actually still on manual focus. And you can see right up here where it says MF. Manual focus is what that stands for. And then down here you've got infinite focus. I haven't really ever used that. It's just a toggle basically. You can't actually leave it on infinite. Right below that is what we have where the iris is. And iris you cannot control while we are in auto exposure. So over here is your auto exposure mode. I can turn all that off, but I'm going to leave it on because most of the time I'm not going to be messing with. Video is not quite the same as photography where you have to compensate between shutter speed and aperture and ISO. In this one you have shutter speed, which is essentially frame rate. You have ISO, which is essentially built into the sensor, how you can't really adjust it all that well. And then you have iris, which is the video camera version of aperture. So the iris is the opening that opens and closes to let in light. You can manually control it, but it's a little tricky. And I don't know that I really ever need to. Most of the time, leaving it on auto with everything else works just fine. Gain has to do with, let me put this down a little bit. Gain has to do with adding light, so it's kind of the opposite of the ND filter. So if I want to add gain, it doesn't do anything while I'm in auto. So if I turn this to manual, come on. I want to switch to manual. Oh, here it is. This actually is the switch. So I switch this to manual, then my gain will brighten it up. So yeah, this actually is our switch between auto and manual exposure. This set of buttons right in here in this silver box has to do with playback. So I can access the menu through here. And I can also, so the same buttons that are up here work down here too. I can also switch this to playback mode, and then I can play the footage that I've shot on the screen. So if you want to review what you've shot, you can play it back using these. It's also useful for the menu if you don't want to try to read this upside down, because this is upside down when this is flipped out. Then the other button here that is really useful is the white balance. And white balance in this room, it's probably already set, but literally all I have to do is hold the button down, and it's already been set, so it's not going to change. But that will adjust. It's an auto white balance. These cameras don't have different settings for different types of light. They're just all auto white balance. And it's already set. It won't change on me. But if I take this outdoors, everything's going to look blue, and so I would just hit white balance and it would adjust. There's also some presets down here. You can actually preset white balance. You can do a custom white balance. It's a little tricky. You basically shoot something that's white. You get like a card that's white, hold it up in front of the camera. You can tell basically it tells the sensor this is white and it adjusts everything based on that. So then I have some presets I can switch. Like if I were shooting indoors and outdoors and I were kind of going back and forth between, I could set a preset for A, indoors, and B, outdoors. And then I can just switch it back and forth. I wouldn't have to keep changing the white balance. I could just toggle it. Then there's this auto lock on off. And this button allows me to lock exposure. So I can actually set an exposure, and then if I do this, it will change the A to L's, which means it's locked. So then I can change location or change angle or lighting or something, and the exposure won't change. It'll be locked to that exposure. And then the most important thing when it comes to shooting, especially at the beginning level for the video modules, is this focus assist. One of the biggest issues I ever run into in grading these is they're out of focus. So focus assist, short of shooting everything on autofocus, which sometimes you simply cannot do, And I'll demonstrate that with like the rack focus and the foreground background focus. You can't do a rack focus with autofocus on. It's impossible. So you have to use manual focus for that. That's where the focus assist comes in. So if I were to push this and turn that on, you see how that screen, on the screen, around her glasses and her hair down here, there's like blue outline around stuff. You see that blue? If I were to really defocus that blue starts to go away. There it is. So now she's all in focus. So it's like a really useful indicator of where the focus is.
Okay, so the blue is the focus.
The blue is what's in focus. For instance, let's see here. If I were to try, here, let's do this. So if I were to zoom this in on that bag, and then I can roll this focus back and forth, you can actually see the focus shifting across the bag in that blue. So now it's on this end of the bag. Now the focus is on that. And you can see if I'm in the middle, the focus isn't very, it's only like maybe 8 inches wide. That range of focus is pretty small. But this is where focus assist is really useful because it shows you exactly where your focus is in your scene. And you can easily like look at what's blue. It's really quick to say, okay, my focus is like right here. Right here.
Okay.
It says focus assist on it, so that shouldn't be too difficult to find, but that it'll just toggle your screen between color, and it's actually grayscale with that blue